And welcome back to Open Your Eyes. It is a lovely Tuesday morning, and what a way to get our conversation started with none other than the Senator for the NGOs, Osmany Salas, who is in with us, and the Belize Network of NGOs, actually. Senator Salas, Anita said, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome.
Good morning, sir.
And it's nice to have you. And something tells me that this is the first time you're on this particular set.
Yes. Feels good.
You know, there's so many things that are hovering over our country. You're a senator, you've got your network, of course. And I'm sure the conversation at this particular point is very heavy, top heavy actually. Reason being is because there's so many things that we want to iron out. But also the public would like to know the perspective of the NGOs on how they feel about current issues that are plaguing our country. Let's start there, and some of the first things that we're working on in terms of the issues plaguing our country.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And we could start with our last press release, one that we issued last week, I believe, or at most 2 weeks ago, on the need for campaign finance legislation.
Yeah.
So we issued our statement on that as a result of, what most Belizeans by now know about. And before I forget, I have to give huge kudos to the media, and I want to single out Channel 5 and the fearless Hipólito for going all the way to Ayuda and to inform the Belizean people. If that hadn't happened, there's a lot of specifics that we wouldn't know up to now. That's what I believe. So the media plays a tremendous role in our democracy, and that's a very good example of that. So as a result of all of that and all the concern and the preoccupation with how easy over the years it seems that contributions have been given to our politicians under the guise of campaign financing, we felt the need to issue a statement as a network on the need for campaign finance legislation. It is very important to bring that under some kind of control and regulation. It's just open right now. And whilst as NGOs, we need to be registered organizations, up to now, our political parties are not registered organizations. So there's a lot of need for
so there's less accountability for what happens within the organization, especially with financials.
Right. So we issued that call, and I have heard the opposition say that in their first 100 days they would want to, pass such a legislation. But there's a need for that now, and I am happy to say that a draft campaign finance law has started to circulate. That was actually yesterday was sent to me by the Senate President Darrell Bradley. And for public review. So I've started to disseminate that this morning. I haven't had a chance to review it. I haven't had a chance to absorb it. I will certainly get deep into that, and it is quite timely because as a social partner organization, we have reached out. I have reached out to the chamber. I have reached out to the unions. And last week, I had a meeting with the leadership at the chamber, at the BCCI, on campaign finance and a couple other matters. And I was happy to note that the BCCI has started to work on campaign finance legislation, the drafting process. And they're happy to get us on board as an NGO network, and the intention is to invite the unions. The only reason that the unions were not represented at the meeting last week was because the following day was their demonstration. So they were very busy. So, but we've reached out to NTUCB and to BNTU, and we will reach out to the Council of Churches. So it seems that things are aligning right now. It's an opportunity. The time for cynicism, I think, we should set that aside for now and focus on this opportunity. There's a call. It seems like the time is now, so let's latch on to it and see what we can do with it.
I guess the cynicism comes from the sense of powerlessness that people feel, that you can call for campaign finance legislation, that you can have even a member of the current administration prepare a draft, or the chamber or any other entity, but it really will take political will to be able to move it through, to get it into the House and have some sort of start. As a representative of the Senate and specifically for the non-governmental organizations or civil society, your role is crucial because you're one of the social partners, one of the non-political parties that's represented in our Senate. When you hear the concerns of people, whether within the network of NGOs or just within your communities, what's your message to them about relinquishing that cynicism and establishing or recognizing the power that they do possess?
Well, as I shared with a couple of media houses during the demonstration last Thursday, and I came out to be a part of that and to support the unions in the calls that they were making for improved governance. That was one of the questions asked, and my response then and now will be that as a citizenry we need to be engaged. I was just introduced to a term a few weeks ago that's called political hobbyism. Hobbyism, and a lot of us do it. Armchair activists, social media activists. We are in our homes, we're in our offices, we're on Facebook, and we comment and but that is it. And that is not enough. Not enough. We need to hit our communities. We need to hit our streets. We need to make sure the our area reps, and standard bearers want to be area reps, know that we are engaged. Most people feel that just by the nature of being born here, we are citizens. That is just the beginning of citizenship, engagement, but that comes from the individual. I just saw a post while I was waiting to come on this morning by my good friend Jerry Enriquez, where there was this person talking to the audience and said, "Who wants change?" Everybody raised their hand. And then he asked, "Who wants to change?" Nobody raised their hand.
Nobody wants to change.
No, to change. And our politicians have gotten away with bloody murder because as citizens and voters, we haven't been engaged more than election day, for the most part, and leave them to their own designs. And as I said on Thursday, I firmly believe that we have become the clients of the politicians who have become our patrons. That's what in many ways I think is in place now, and that's as a result of what is called clientelism. And so that's related to campaign financing.
Well,
but
I think the issue of corruption, it's pervasive. It's
very much so.
Moved into just about every part of our life here in Belize, and that's what makes the problem seem so insurmountable.
But I just heard on one of the local stations, the former Minister of National Security say that if Senator Osmany would have his way, politicians wouldn't have any means to help the people. And that comment floored me because it showed me that either they're missing the point or they purposely don't want to see it. We don't help the people with handouts. That is immediate gratification, maybe.
Give them a fish then.
Give them a fish, give them a ham, literally. But what about the medium to long term? What about not giving the fish, but teach them for fish? What about helping them in their lives? What about comprehensive social assistance programs? That's why I know it's an economic term, but I hate when I hear about pro-poor policies. I know it's an economic term, I know what it means, but it gives, to me, it gives a sense that we just need to keep giving handouts rather than helping the people be better prepared. We haven't attacked poverty the way we should have been doing.
We've been working with a catch net, trying to save some people, but not enough to elevate them from their circumstance.
So entrenched now.
Job security, that's job creation, that's looking at establishing better systems in place, helping people to get more educated. And I know to a certain extent some of the programs, Boost for example, those start the process, but it's not doing enough.
Exactly.
But let me go back to one of the things that you said that Honorable Saldivar stated, and in fact it's no different from I think one of his Facebook posts saying that politicians essentially work every day to go out to get money to help their people. And it said so plainly that it leaves the question, have they somehow lost their way in understanding what their role and purpose is? Not just him specifically, but if he's speaking so broadly, because an elected official is not there to pay your light bill or to give you $50, $100, whatever amount of money when you line up at their door. They're there as policymakers. But for some reason over time, that entire role seems to have been either weakened, I'd say diminished, but they do make some laws, but it seems to not be the priority anymore. How did we get here?
The priority seems to be to perpetuate themselves in power and you know, any means necessary. How did we get there? I think, again, it goes back. It seems easier said than done, but it goes back to citizen engagement. Engagement and from our neighborhoods. And it needs to be constant, it needs to be regular. And it shouldn't be prompted and led by the politician. It should be citizen-led.
But Senator Salas, I think one of the reasons as to how we get there is the corral of the people, especially at this particular point. Because at this particular point, we figure that people would want this.
But I have an example, though,
sure, on
some of the things that I think are keeping us back. And I saw it happen at the Thursday demonstration, the NTUCB demonstration. It showed me that we need to have political education in this country from our schools. So when the group of UB students arrived at the demonstration, they got a standing ovation. Rightly so. But what I want to mention is this. Our universities, our tertiary level institutions should be encouraging our students to get active and to get involved. That NTUCB demonstration was a non-partisan demonstration. That was the ideal setting for our students to participate. But I understand, well, from that the non-school, non-teaching day that was granted by the Ministry of Education supposedly did not apply to the University of Belize. Regardless, I believe the universities should have
they are next.
Encourage the students to participate. And I also heard that even though some students, the students agreed to walk out, some just stayed home, took it like a day off. So it shows you that there's a lot of work that we need to do. And I was encouraged when I saw that group of students come on their own and showed up in solidarity. We need much more of that happening.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've been saying for quite a few days now that there's an interview with one of the students who very clearly said they are not being taught how to participate in this democracy. They're not being taught how it works and how it should work and what's the ideal. And she spoke very clearly saying, you know, if I didn't reach university level, I would have never been exposed to it. So imagine all those who didn't move on to tertiary level education or didn't have that as a part of their specified field. So I do share your point in we are missing somewhere that integral part, and it's building an active citizenry. You know, it's building people who participate.
And as civil society, there's a lot we can contribute in that area as well. Years ago, there was a very active SPARE, Society for the Promotion of Education and Research. It's been inactive for years. We need more NGOs like that.
Well, do we have any governance? SPARE was a governance-based organization.
Contributed tremendously to that.
But we don't have any. We have a lot of environmental groups.
We have a lot of social groups as well.
Yes.
We have, you know, and when you look at the numbers, the social groups outnumber the environmental groups. A lot of people might not realize that because the environmental groups seem to be better financed and louder and more involved. But the social groups are there.
But where are the governance groups?
Exactly. That is a gap. So in the meantime, as social partners, We try to work along with the unions and the business community and ourselves, but we need NGOs. I completely agree that can go back to do the work like what Aspire used to do.
Yeah.
I remember them in their heyday. We miss, that's missing. That's a huge gap right now.
No, I agree, and I'm very clear in saying that my involvement with Spare many years ago was my education on understanding governance now.
Yes.
But going back to the issue of campaign financing, and I think that there seems to be the call for quite a few things. The NTUCB listed 6 demands. The opposition have listed their demands. The cry of the people seems to be more along the lines of campaign financing, and we're still talking about UNCAC. What do you think needs to happen for us to actually spur the type of change that we are demanding? Because we haven't heard anything from the government. There have been 2 protests and we've not heard a single thing. It's been crickets.
Well, I represent the NGO network on the UNCAC project board. The unions are represented, the churches are represented, the business community is represented. And that board hasn't met in over 1 year.
Yes.
Wow.
And if we can focus on that particular convention, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption was signed, ratified in late 2016. And again, we always have to remember, if it had not been for the 11-day shutdown of the country led by the BNTU,
That's right.
That was one of the demands that they had in place. Who knows where we would be with UNCAC ratification right now? But so that was just the first step.
And it was 2 months later that it was
2
ratified.
months later. So that shows you people power. Sometimes that seems to be the only way that government of the day listens. So now UNCAC has been signed and ratified. A project board was put in place. There was a flurry of activities for like a year. And as I said, since February last year, nothing. As social partners, we have been writing to the focal point.
Well, I want to get there because the Attorney General said in an interview that he was speaking generally about the protest and the demands by the NTUCB, but that does include a demand for reconvening of the meetings of the UNCAC Steering Committee.
The project board.
And he said that this could have been settled by just requesting a meeting. Now, we've had conversations with yourself, with the Chamber, with the NTUCB from last year in December on the International Day Against Corruption. And you indicated that, in fact, you had requested meetings.
Oh, we've been requesting numerous times. We've requested like 3 times over the last year.
So the other response is that because the study done by the 2 external countries has not been submitted yet, the Attorney General is saying the UN is saying don't do anything until you get those reports. I don't know if he's talking United Nations New York, if he's talking, I know you partner with UNDP as well here, if it's UNDP locally. He just says the UN says don't do anything. It seems kind of hard to believe that type of messaging coming from an international organization, but perhaps you are more aware to share with us.
No, what the focal point has said, the Attorney General's ministry is the focal point for UNCAC in Belize. What he's been saying is a total cop-out. I certainly cannot accept that response. By the way, as social partners, we've written to UNDP asking them to confirm whether that is the case.
Okay.
We are still awaiting a response. But there's a lot that we can do in the meantime. Very true. We need to go through what they call 2 peer review cycles, where these independently selected countries would come and review our situation here. They've looked at criminalization, law enforcement, and international cooperation. There are 2 other areas that they need to come and review later on. On the first review, an executive summary of the report has been around from December 2018. Now, an executive summary suggests that there must be a full report. That's the only way you can have an executive summary. You have to have a full report. But looking at the executive summary alone, there are a lot of recommendations written into that, things that we can implement now. I must say that the previous Solicitor General, who was very active on the UNCAC project board, I think he's left over a year now. before his departure, we were already talking about next steps, about how to strengthen anti-corruption process in Belize. And two pieces of legislation were being discussed at the time: witness protection and whistleblowers legislation, right? And the discussion got started, and then he left, and nobody picked up the mantle after that from the Attorney General's ministry. So what I'm trying to say, John and Marlene, is that there is a lot that we can do while this peer review process is taking place.
Executive summary already has recommendations that can be implemented.
It points out gaps and thereby indications on what needs to be done, if we know what the gaps are.
Because I haven't seen the executive summary, can you tell me if there is any conflict that may potentially happen if you execute these recommendations, if the report comes back with anything different?
Yeah. Not to me. One specific mention in the executive summary had to do with the Integrity Commission. And it's what's written in there is what, as social partners, we've been crying for at least me, for the last 3 years. Strengthen the Integrity Commission.
Yeah.
The Integrity Commission, yes, when the government says, but there is an Integrity Commission, it's true. However, what they fail to say is that the Secretariat is not in place. There are 2 office support people at the Integrity Commission. But if you look at the legislation, Prevention of Corruption Act, that establishes the Integrity Commission, it calls for key staff posts that can actually do like a chief investigator, a forensic analyst, etc. That would help that commission do its work. So what mostly has happened is that, is that politically exposed persons like myself submit our financial declarations once a year, but it should go beyond that, right? This is the opportunity to investigate and check on things such as illicit enrichment, etc. It's not only to file, that is just one part of it. So the UNCAC, the peer review executive summary for the first report, that's one of the things that they pointed out that needs to be strengthened. Extradition, treaties, they recommended that Belize sign on to more bilateral extradition treaties. They pointed out that we only have with 3 countries at this time: Mexico, United States, and Guatemala. And it indicated things like that, right? So we haven't had that discussion yet. And I don't see the will and the interest by the focal point for us to have that. So there is a continued need for the project board. And as a project board, we were able to secure some financing first from UNDP and then from the US Embassy to engage in education in relation to political education and the fight against corruption. So there's a lot that we can do in the meantime.
So there's a lot that we can do in the meantime. See, Senator, there are a lot of things that John public would not understand about the entire process. And I think this is where we need to continue to educate the people on exactly what these things are and how they're supposed to be rolled out, and at least the timeline. Reason for that is because I think that if everybody is on board and everybody understand the process, that is when the fork will come out for folks to eventually try to move things on. So let's get there as to the timeline as to having these things on. Because we've got a lot of things hovering, thanks to the media again, thanks to social media, because we've got so many things hovering over our country, people want to see this, people want to see that. And we're so afraid, John Q. Public is so afraid that Dermancy steps in afterwards because nobody is doing anything, or we're talking about it now, but we're not doing anything about it. What would be timeline to put something like UNCAC in? We're talking about some of the steps to try and get it there, but people want the timeline. We need to know exactly what we have got to work with so things can be put in place.
Right. I'm glad you asked that question because it gives me the opportunity to reiterate what a colleague of mine said on your show a few days ago on UNCAC. And he said that we really didn't need UNCAC in Belize. And I want to have the opportunity to explain, like him, what is meant when he or I would say that. We have good anti-corruption legislation and units in Belize, We just haven't giving them the resources to do a better job. And UNCAC creates opportunity to point out what these gaps are and where we need to fill the gaps. That's the importance of us signing on to that convention. It puts more attention to it, and it sort of forces us, or should force us, to act. But the Contractor General is an excellent example of that, and it takes the will. The Contractor General's office has essentially been, and one was just appointed, a new Contractor General, the office holder, a secretary, and I believe an office assistant. So by the way that is set up, it becomes a desk-bound job or an office-bound job, and the role of a Contractor General needs to go way beyond that. I had the opportunity to see how it functions in Jamaica. They have a fully set up office with 5 divisions, each division having their staff, and they're actually going out in the field to see how these contracts are being implemented. Why? And the idea is, are we getting value for our money? Are we getting bang for our buck?
Had we had a Contractor General with the right resources, someone would have gone to some of the very streets we've seen in Belize City that didn't last for a year.
But also vetting these contracts from the very start.
Or other roads that we have seen as well. And that's part of it. You know, I agree. I think you and Senator Lizarraga and several others have been on the show saying the very same thing. That if we go down the list on paper of what we do possess, if just these entities were strengthened, I would never say we don't need the UNCAC, but we would have a very good start in reducing the amount of corruption that we know exists.
Our own domestic
the proof
drive.
may not be as the Prime Minister usually talks about. It's not like you have the proof in court, but we do know enough to know that you're not getting bang for your buck, or that the procurement processes aren't taking place properly. You can start with the Integrity Commission. You can talk about the Public Accounts Commission. You can talk about the Auditor General's Office, the Contractor General's Office.
And the list
and we
goes
can go on and on of all these things that on paper look really good.
At the last budget debate, and the other one is coming next month. Very fast, which will be my 4th one. But at the last budget debate, I pointed out that on the term word UNCAC was mentioned only once in the entire budget, and not where it should have been mentioned, which is the Attorney General's ministry as the focal point for that convention. It was mentioned, I believe, in the Office of the Auditor General's, in the section of the budget for that office.
Was this perspective only yours, or did your colleagues share the same sentiment?
Right, they share the same sentiment. But to me, it was indicative of the lack of will and interest to advance on the UNCAC agenda. But we've signed and ratified onto that years now. Now the challenge is to put things into action.
And to get moving with the implementation.
Definitely so.
But so looking at the situation of corruption, we're talking about, some are calling it the top-down approach. In other words, we're trying to get officials who are probably the least motivated to implement these types of changes to essentially put in legislations, to create policies, to reinforce institutions that already exist. Another way to address it is to work with the people. You spoke of the handout system, and let's not just gloss over it, because it is a critical issue in this country. Yesterday, the Senate President, Darrell Bradley, spoke out against people having their votes paid for, and how undemocratic it is in this entire process. What do you think can be done to be able to get people to recognize, 1, the value of their vote, and 2, that this dependency that we have accepted on our politicians is a part of the problem that we see today on a grander scale?
It won't be easy, but campaign finance regulation is a place to start. And once the politician has limited, quote unquote, limited resources to run their campaigns, there won't be as much money to throw around like that. And so that is a start. The politicians need to be brought in under some kind of regulatory regime in relation to how themselves and political parties are financed because it's just an open paquet, really,
Yeah.
and money,
Yeah.
a lot of money coming from external sources.
So currently, we
that is
nothing
dangerous
in
for
place
democracy.
as to where you get the money from, where you put the money, or how you spend the money.
None at all.
Nothing.
None at all.
Because I found it interesting that if we go back to the Saldiva scandal, we're talking about Durman giving $50,000, at least in one instance, US, in Miami, and first the Prime Minister said maybe it was campaign financing, and then Saldiva did say it was for campaign financing. The text somewhat suggested that. But then in a media interview said that he spent some of that money on sporting
Oh, yeah.
equipment
I heard that
for
too.
his
I
personal
heard that too.
franchise.
Without skipping a beat.
But is that campaign finance? That's my question.
That's not.
I'm not.
That is not at all.
Yeah.
So, once this is regulated, the hope is that the politician would think twice on how they would invest that money to finance their campaigns. And I've always said that even the period of campaigns should have some sort of regulation and limits. It's and so that the people feel have the space and the time to make their own decision and not feel like they're being compressed on all sides. So I think campaign finance regulations would be a good start.
External funding sources. I mean, I think even if it was for campaign financing, one of the questions naturally would have is why would this person want to contribute
Exactly
towards
so.
this campaign?
Nobody.
It's a common sense question.
Nobody gives that much money for nothing. I'm sorry.
And on a periodic basis.
Oh no, that's absolutely crazy. And if we believe him that all politicians do it, that shows you the magnitude of the problem and the challenge.
Yeah.
The magnitude of it. It's enormous. And when you consider the topic of political clientelism, even parties in opposition find ways to do this. It's not only the parties in power, but it's the opposition parties as well.
But of course.
It's about inducements to the voters. And it is very dangerous.
There are a few more things that's going around, and one of the things that stand out to the Belizean public is actually the demands of the unions, like we mentioned earlier, the demands of NTUCB. What are your thoughts on their demands, and do you see them to be possible within now and before election?
I support their demands. And I understand where they were coming from when they put out no elections until. The way I understood that is that we need to start focusing on that now. I believe some of those things could be put in place before the elections, assuming that they won't be called until at least November. I believe we would have the time. Look, when a government wants to do something, when a party in power wants to do something, they do it, They find a way and they do it. I have seen so many bills that have gone through 3 readings in one sitting.
Yes.
Things can be accomplished. And there is a cry from different areas, if we go back to campaign finance regulations, that people are crying out for this. Now is the time, man. Now is the time. Let the opposition parties, review a draft, the government, social partners, other groups. Let's try to make that happen. So I think that some of these things can be put in place before the elections, assuming we have sufficient time.
Yeah. Do you support the fixed term limits? This is one of the things the opposition.
The fixed term limits for
the government.
Yes, for the Prime Minister we have 3, right?
3, yeah.
For the
but they're also saying a set date for the election, so that there's no guessing in place.
I completely support that. It's very healthy to have that, so you know that is there. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, or else it just becomes a political ball game.
Yeah.
What other type of changes do you think would help in being able to curb what we are seeing today?
I think the budgeting process is one of those that we need to look at more critically and carefully. For a few years now, it's been program budgeting, but after having the opportunity to review the budget 3 years now, for the most part, I see them as being cut and paste jobs. A budget is a planning tool, and it should engage stakeholders and others. And I really haven't seen that happen. So I think that the budgeting process is a tremendous process.
Yes.
I won't assume that it is an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be just written up within the Ministry of Finance. There should be engagement, there should be consultation on what some of the challenges are. And I know one of the biggest needs that we'll have for many years in this country is to pay down our external debt. That has always been, that will for many years be a major burden on us. All the more reason to engage, to consult, and see what could be done within these limitations. And there's a lot we could do. We find we have signed on to loans, multi-million-dollar loans for infrastructure, for roads, but we have other priorities, many other priorities. That is where we need stakeholder engagement and consultation, and I haven't seen that happening where our budget is concerned. So I think that's an area where we can
And Senator Lizaraga has always
tremendously.
spoken of missing information in the budget
Oh,
as
yeah.
it is
Oh, yeah.
permitted.
Leaves a lot to be desired, definitely.
And the recent court ruling in the Supreme Court looking at the unconstitutionality of the supplementary budgets going in.
Well, it shows you the laissez-faire attitude we've had with our budgets, and that it must stop sometime, and you know.
Yeah.
You know, when we look at the very short history of Belize, there are not many moments where we get this type of activity and momentum going. In fact, the most recent memory is 2005, which is 15 years ago.
Already.
When we saw the unions and we saw social partners taking to the streets. I do want to say, of course, that it definitely went the wrong direction when we saw the riots that came as a result. But in the beginning, the momentum was just this general sense of frustration that people had with the administration at that time. You know, I think before that, maybe the next, and you can tell me because you'd probably remember better, would have been maybe the retrenchment protests. So it doesn't happen very often. When you look at the current context in the country, do you think that people will hold steady? Will the social partners hold steady in keeping up the demands that we're making on our government?
I think we will hold steady. I mean, you know, speaking for myself as a representative of the NGO community, I am committed to do my part and to reach out to my colleagues in the other social partners and sectors and to maintain it. And that's the message I had for the chamber when I met with them. We need to keep the pressure on, if we want to call it that. It seems the time seems to be ripe. It's during election season that they seem to listen a little more to you. So it's an opportunity that we have right now. So, but it has to be consistent. We have to keep at it. But I go back to the individual involvement. We seem to be involved at election time, and as individual citizens and voters, we need to be engaged more constant.
Well, you called it
constantly.
What did you call it? Political hobbyism?
Hobbyism.
There's also another term. It's called clicktivism, which is you think that your activism is done with a click. But that's
so. You know, and if we don't do that, at some time the frustrations will boil over, and then you will see these mass protests, etc. But that is the last resort.
That's the last resort.
And there should be many other things we could do before that. And there may not be a need for that, but that's always our last resort, and we do it when we feel a need for that.
But then again, it's left up to the people, because the pressure, like you mentioned, the pressure must be constant. And one of the things that we know is that, especially for government in power, is that there is always a segue to things so that the masses can basically keep still. So we'd put something in place so everybody could just be suppressed. So we just want for people to not say anything else about this. Another one of the things I wanted to touch on, we want for the masses to come out and support. We want for the masses to come on out and basically use their voices. And the more of us are out there, the more power we have. But then this is real political victimization. What can we do to try and get rid of this? People are being put in place because they're close allied to the politician.
I hear you.
How can we get these things off? Because we've got so many people now graduating from school. June is coming up.
This is why the unions are so important. And I have to say hats off to them for the demonstration they held Thursday, and in particular the BNTU for
Yeah.
bringing out the teachers. I admire how well organized they are and how they speak with one voice. And I think the more members the unions have, the unions become stronger, and the unions are there to represent their members. If there is anyone being victimized or feel they're being victimized, that is the role of a union, to help, to represent them, to fight for their rights. And so the more membership the unions have, the stronger they are. So the BNTU has managed to keep their members in their numbers high, and but there are still many teachers that are not members of the union.
Yeah.
So I had to say hats off to them for bringing out their members last Thursday, and my colleague in the Senate, Senator Smith, who is the president of the union, had said, and I attended the launch of their 50th anniversary celebrations a couple of weeks ago, that they have a series of activities planned, and they are ready to come out again if they feel the need. Yeah. And when they make the call, they will come out. Yeah. I respect them highly for that.
And I guess, when we mentioned earlier that helping to educate people on different ways of participating within the public discourse, it's not always protest too. I mean, we don't necessarily have the culture, but in other cultures you write letters, you sign petitions,
of course.
You demand, you keep on saying when the area rep comes around to ask for your vote, ensure that you have your list of demands as well. What other ways?
I think the area reps should be obligated to have regular town hall meetings, for example, meet with their constituents, not only with who they consider their supporters, but neighborhood meetings. I saw some of this happen during the ICJ education campaign that happened all over the country. There were neighborhood meetings all over the place. And people came out, people wanted to hear, people wanted to contribute, people wanted to have a say.
Yes.
I think that in itself would go a long way.
Yeah.
Where the politicians would listen to the day-to-day challenges, not only from their hardcore supporters who will never challenge them, but also from the average person out there who really has concerns that they want to put across. Their area representatives, when they are elected, they cease to be just a representative of their party, but it's for the entire constituency.
Wow.
So there's a lot to work on.
And we appreciate you coming in and really just scratching the surface on some of these issues. But we're keeping the conversation going. There's a lot taking place in the country. If we focus exclusively on the political issues of the UDP alone, that can go a long time. But the bigger issue, the one that really affects the wider country, is the issue of corruption, the frustration people are feeling, and what we can do about it.
I look forward to when a group of us can come here and other shows and talk about the campaign finance law, the draft one.
Well, there is a draft. You said the chamber is working on a draft.
They're working on one as well.
So we will see. And as I said, we haven't really gotten any. According to what the Senate President said yesterday, he would introduce that draft to his party, and we will see where that will go.
And kudos to him to get that started. And the chamber as well.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Salas.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.